Staying in contact. I'm London Mitchell. My goal with these weekly visits is to bring us in touch with interesting individuals who have a heartfelt story to tell about efforts underway to improve the quality of life in our communities. Several years ago, when I was managing public affairs for the Lucas County Board of Developmental Disabilities, I met my guest today, Rob Snow. His advocacy for individuals with disabilities is genuine, sincere, and understandable.
My advocacy really started, and it's different for everybody, but it really was, when I had when my wife and I had our son Henry, born in 2009 with Down syndrome. And I think it's at that moment you sort of um, you can jump in, the deep end, you can tiptoe in through the shallow waters and figure out what your comfort level is. I think we just chose to jump in, and maybe that was even me more so than my wife. I just knew I didn't want to sort of lower the tone of my voice when I talked about my son, or how people do. They'll go, oh well, we have two sons, one has Down syndrome. I never wanted to say it like that. I always wanted to say, yeah, I've got two sons. One has Down syndrome. He's absolutely terrific. Greatest thing that ever happened. I'm very quick to kind of jump in and do that. And it was funny that um, we were in the NICU, the neonatal intensive care unit at Akron Children's Hospital for about 5 or 6 days. And, for us, the good part was that really there wasn't really any nothing was too challenging in terms of any issues that he was having health wise. But it was great to be in there. He was getting further checks and things like that. And I remember we stayed at the Ronald McDonald House those 5 nights, and the woman commented, she goes, you're the first person I've ever heard in here who just very openly talks about your child's condition and disability. And I went, really? And she said, yeah. And she goes, it's just so refreshing. You have such a honesty about it, and like that you don't care, you don't see it as an issue. And I remember those words, and I thought, I was surprised by that, but I also was like, yeah, I like that she said that, and it made me feel like, yeah, this is how I'm going to go forth in life. As if this is my son, and he's just as great as everybody else out here. So that was sort of the start of it.
And you are expressing this positive attitude rather successfully, Rob Snow, in your public speaking.
Yeah, I mean, well, that became the bigger part of it, right? Because I really wanted to go, all right, well, I feel this way, my family feels this way, I've gotten my mother, my father, my in-laws to feel that, everybody feels this way and rallies around it. But why do other people feel differently? Why would anybody look at our situation and think, oh, maybe feel sad or something, or feel like, this is, and it's, so I said, okay, the only way I know how to deal with this is to speak about it. And, I had this background in stand-up comedy from way back when in Chicago, and it sort of had resurfaced after 10 years of being dormant. Right around when we had Henry, I started doing comedy again. So I had this ability to speak, I think, and at least to tell things in a very a way that people can relate to. It's not so heavy on the big words and things. So, it's just very plain and obvious to me. And so I started speaking about it, and I wanted people to know how I felt. And then as I grew in that show and would speak to other parents and other people in this community, you would realize, yeah, a lot of us feel like this. We all feel great about our kids. Yes, it's different. Logistically, we have different things, but I always think of it like, the therapies or things like that I've taken Henry to over the years. it's like if your kid plays travel soccer or something like that. You have more of a time commitment on certain things, but you're raising your child in a way that you just do as a parent.
Your comedy routine, how do you bring humor into the situation of having a child with Down syndrome? That doesn't sound very comedic to me.
Oh, well, live in our house for any given day. I mean, it's incredibly comedic. My first show that I did, I think the show that I had done with you all was called Minimize the Mountain, but where we're discussing the biggest challenges in life, not necessarily having a child with developmental disabilities or a disability, but it could be that, it could be divorce and loss of a job and death and all these things that, kind of fall on you and, hit you like, just hit you to the point that you don't know what you're going to do next. Um, and we all can relate to that. I mean, if I always say in my show, if you haven't had one of those things happen to you, spoiler alert, you will at some point in your life. And so I relate it certainly around having a child with Down syndrome, but and what we've done to raise Henry and there's comedy in everything. Humor exists, and if you don't let humor in, I mean, the majority of anybody's day, you're going to find humor in things. And so, and that's the very message, London, that I'm really trying to convey is that we're not like crying, around the dinner table, and we don't go to bed sad. Those of us or most of us in this community, there was a study done that said that I think 80% of parents have a more positive outlook on life because of their child with a disability. So, when you look at that, it makes me feel better about life. It makes me feel better about the person that I am and that he's teaching me to be. And so I've just always loved comedy, and it wasn't something that I was gonna not apply to this as well.
You've also written a book.
I've written two, yeah, I've written two now. The second one is yet to be released. It sort of sits in my it sort of sits in my documents, my Word documents on my laptop. It's fully complete, it's fully been edited, and for some reason I just haven't had the time to really put it out there. And but the other one is interesting. It's called What I Should Have Said. And this was this is a response to all of the comments that you do. And you talk about your earlier question, where do you find the funny? Well, this is how you find the funny. So you get these questions or these comments from people, and many parents, or those related to an individual with a developmental disability, helped to provide me with some of these comments. There's about 50 or 60 of these comments in the book. And then what I do is I take these comments and then I provide the three responses of what I wish I would have said in those moments. So, and then the book is divided up into the kind of the innocuous, but like still wrong. So like well intended, I call it, but still wrong. So when people say, I'm so sorry, that's a very well intended thought, of course, but that's people not knowing what they're really saying. And so, I can take a comment like that. And, my initial reaction is, what do you mean you're sorry? Sorry for what? Oh, the greatest thing that ever happened to me? Are you for this child who is, flourishing in life, has more friends than I could ever even imagine having, is just loves his life, just incredible things that is going through. That's what you're sorry for? And so I have like and then I'll write my three comments on the other page of what I wish I would have said. And it's funny because people will look at this book and they'll have a lot of reactions. They'll be like, it was funny. You were mad at times. You went a little far at times. And all of that is true. Because you do. I mean, when you get some of these comments, especially when the book veers towards like the just plain wrong comments, you know, when people might come up and say, how disappointed were you? You know, that is a really wrong comment to say to anybody who's just had a child. And then, you get a comment like that and you kind of smile politely, grit your teeth. and maybe you find a way to exit the room, and then that's when you get in your car or wherever in a private space and you think of all the things you wish you would have said. And that is when I would get, and it's written in the book, kind of angry. So some of my responses are sort of angry in those moments, but most of them are done more comedically. And I will tell you that this book was cathartic. This is one of the things I talk about in my Minimize the Mountain show. One of the ways to begin to minimize that mountain is to find the positive, and for me, this was finding the positive in a place that you would hear bad comments or negative comments that would try to kind of, add more to your mountain. And this was a way to keep minimizing that mountain.
Having a child with special needs, in your case, a child born with Down syndrome, you as a parent must have felt initially, what do I do now? How do I deal with this? Where do I go for some help or guidance?
Yeah, that's really the first thing that you do start thinking is what does this mean? Most people, there's some people that certainly had a prenatal diagnosis, so they had sort of some time to prepare. But even if you had the prenatal diagnosis, that at the moment of diagnosis, at the moment you hear it, you're still thinking that thought, what do I do now? And so the beautiful thing is that the resources out there are incredible, especially now. I mean, I think back of the 20 and 30 and 40 years ago where the parents um, decided to have this child when they had that prenatal diagnosis, because they would be given certain pamphlets, and the pamphlet might be for adoption. You go back far enough, institution, abortion, you know, those were like the first three. And then the fourth one might be how to raise this child yourself, you know. And that was so that was like the afterthought that doctors were pushing. They're like, look at these three first, and then here's the fourth one if you, for some reason, decide to raise this child yourself. So I always look at the parents who made that decision 40 and 50 years ago to start this process, because all of these resources that are out there now, and you think of, like the Lucas County Board of Developmental Disability, like all the boards of developmental disabilities, like the National Down Syndrome Society, like all the ARCs out there, these incredible resources were started by parents sitting around kitchen tables, for to build a need, to satisfy this need that parents had in answering that very question. What do we do? Where do we go to get this? So when I sat in that NICU, my wife was doing most of the work in terms of, taking care of the child whenever she could, or be in that room with the child. And I was sort of relegated out to the parents' waiting area. And I would just research, and I just found so much great information. And immediately, like a woman from it was the Down Syndrome Association of Northeastern Ohio made an appointment with us to come visit us, and she has a child with Down syndrome, and she was just tremendous. I don't know if you remember, but our doctor, our pediatrician, very coincidentally, we chose her randomly. We had only been in this town, in this area for 9 months, uh, and so we had chosen this pediatrician randomly, so we didn't even meet her until the day that Henry was born. And her response to us when she looked at Henry for the very first time, and we didn't know that he had Down syndrome at this time, her response to us was, well, I'm about 80% sure that your son has Down syndrome. And then, of course, as our hearts were, descending into the pits of our stomach, with that news, she said, and that is awesome. And then she turned around her laptop and started showing us pictures of her daughter, who also happens to have Down syndrome. And so that became an incredible resource for us. So that's, there's places to find them. But I always say, especially in my show, you've got to do that. You've got to do the work in doing that. So finding your motivation, because a lot of people who have these things happen to them stay on their knees and they just don't find that motivation to get off their knees. And so the resources are out there, and one of the steps I have says educate yourself ... thoroughly. because you can go down a rabbit hole on the internet, of course, and stop somewhere bad and not get the full story.
Rob Snow's book, What I Should Have Said, is available on Amazon or from Rob at the link I have posted on my webpage, londonmitchell.news. We'll have more of our discussion with Rob Snow next week as we hear about his activities to help individuals with disabilities find employment. I'm London Mitchell. Please join us as we continue staying in contact.
Previous programs are available on Amazon Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Podbeam, and londonmitchell.news.